Do you remember your first museum visit? Or a time when you felt inspired walking around a museum? What if you had the chance to help give someone their best ever museum memory? Well, now you do. The National Gallery of Art is recruiting for 2 volunteer opportunities this fall to be one of the friendly faces behind their information desks and the guides who lead their school tours. The National Gallery is hosting information sessions throughout the fall, and they hope you'll join them to learn more and apply. Visit nga.gov/volunteer for more information. That's nga.gov/volunteer. Today on CityCast DC, it is our first ever Tuesday Roundup. We're going to be trying this out for the next few weeks, so let us know how you feel about it. For today's show, I'm here with my colleague Julia Karen and Washington City Paper's Alex Coma to talk through new details about how DC government handles sexual harassment complaints. The short answer is not great. Plus, Metro is facing severe cuts and DC could help save them, but will it? And we'll end with a little bit of comic relief. 1-star reviews of the Washington Monument. Today's Tuesday, October 3rd. I'm Bridget Todd, and here's what DC is talking about. Julia, I know that you've been tracking the way that DC is handling sexual harassment claims. In short, it sounds like it is not doing a great job. What can you tell us?
All right, so you would be correct in assuming that in terms of handling complaints, it is mixed at best. There was some fabulous reporting from the Washington Post, so shout out to Megan Flynn and Michael Bryce Sadler, guest on the show. They combed through some data, and what they found was that roughly 300 DC employees have lodged complaints of sexual harassment in city government since Muriel Bowser's anti-sexual harassment order took effect in 2017. That is a high number. Obviously, my view on that is you should be able to be in a workplace and not have any sexual harassment. So Emily Martin, who's the Vice President of Education and Workplace Justice at the National Women's Law Center, she said the fact that 300 people came forward with these kind of complaints, it doesn't necessarily mean that it's a problem. It's actually potentially a good thing because it means that employees are then comfortable coming forward. And as long as the complaints result in actual accountability, that is actually a good thing. It means people are saying, you know what, I trust the process, as it were, and let's see how it plays out. Unfortunately, I don't know that that's the case. The Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel is the place that has all of this data, that tracks all of this. And there were some pretty gruesome and not ideal details. There was a case including 11 women who accused a department health employee that they nicknamed the Perv, just Perv, right, of inappropriate touching and conversations, as well as masturbation by placing his hands inside his pants pockets during face-to-face meetings. So the Post reviewed 290 complaints from December 2017 to June 2023, and just under 30% were substantiated basically in full or in part. So 30% is, I guess, kind of a high number. I don't know. What do you guys think in terms of substantiation of these claims?
Yeah, something that really jumped out to me, and as you say, the Post's excellent reporting about this, is that, in the wording of the mayor's order issued back in 2017 is a kind of a big reason why you're seeing even cases that feel, pretty cut and dry, all things considered, not being substantiated. Essentially, people making allegations need to prove that this harassment was both severe and pervasive. Number one, kind of a subjective standard to hit. What's severe exactly? How pervasive are we talking here? And that's language that even the mayor has admitted in her response to this article, says, yeah, we're going to take a look at that. I mean, she has essentially, in the wake of the revelations about John Falchicchio, her former top advisor, who has had 2 different women within the DC government have sexual harassment complaints against him substantiated by that very own Mayor's Office of Legal Counsel that was, taking some of this data in. In the wake of all this, she's promised change. This seems like a fairly obvious, way in which some of this change could take form. The problem that the article also outlines is that, it's really, sort of incumbent on all of these agencies that are collecting these complaints to have a specific sexual harassment officer identified, so that if you are within this agency, you have a complaint to make, you know who to take it to. And something that we even saw within the Falchicchio scandal is that in some of the agencies that he oversaw, because he oversaw multiple agencies, had a broad portfolio of responsibility, there simply wasn't an identified person for these women to make reports to. It delayed the process by which they ended up coming forward and made it all that more complicated. And the story identifies that even in some instances where there are sexual harassment officers identified, they're not doing a particularly good job of effectively elevating some of these complaints. I think they recount one instance of a sexual harassment officer who basically says that they didn't want to see evidence that an employee had that they were being harassed. And that's speaking of as much as a policy change that the mayor may try to make as a culture change within the DC government. I mean, that is like the really hard conversation that I would hope the mayor is leading in the wake of what we found out about one of her most, trusted deputies.
Yeah, and to that point, Alex, something that really jumped out at me in the Washington Post reporting was the way that the investigators got hung up on certain details that seemed to stall, figuring out what actually happened. Like they had that anecdote about a DCPS employee telling another employee, quote, "I'm going to explode in your mouth," and the agency not being able to tell if that was a sexual comment because he could have meant it a different way. And subsequently, that was found to be inconclusive of harassment. And so getting hung up on these really specific details, it sounds to me like the investigation process is really maybe not as clear as we would hope. But I also wonder, it's good to find out more about how these claims are investigated. But I also want to make sure that, whatever the culture within DC government that allows for rampant harassment to be going on, that is really looked at because, harassment and sexual harassment on the job can completely derail people's careers. People can check out of their own careers. It's really damaging. And so it's not enough in my book to say oh, well, how is it being investigated? What was handled after it was reported? But really, what is going on with the culture inside the government that this is happening at all? Do you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, there are multiple ways that, we could sort of approach this as a city, and very few of them I think are happening right now. I think a lot of people were hopeful in the wake of the Falchicchio revelations that this would force more of a conversation about how DC, specifically the council, is performing oversight of this process. As the article notes, it's certainly been a frustration of mine as a nerd that reads all of the council's oversight reports, is that all of these various council committees ask questions about sexual harassment in different ways. There's nothing standardized about it. Some committees don't ask about it at all. Frankly, it depends on the council member who is leading the committee and how committed they are to doing robust oversight. The administration has made promises about trying to standardize and centralize how this stuff gets reported so that we're taking a look at this more holistically. And they have frankly fallen very short of their promises to do so. There's not necessarily a clear pathway for who's maintaining data, who's handling these investigations. And I think, Bridget, as you identify, in some of these instances, that these are, people who have other jobs within these agencies. Their full-time job is not being a sexual harassment officer. And so they're going to miss stuff about this, just as the mayor's office of legal counsel will miss stuff about this, because they have a broad portfolio that doesn't just include hashing out these very thorny, very personal questions. And I think it sort of starts raising the issue of, is there a better, more centralized way to do this that gives both the council and the public more transparency into the process, but also anyone who's experienced harassment a clearer reporting pathway than exists right now?
So I'm assuming, Alex, what you would like to see is either very clear communication between those things or just one head honcho that says, you know what, if you're reporting, doesn't matter which office you're in, you report it to me and then we go investigate.
Yeah, I think you could make an argument for delegating more of this responsibility over to something like the Office of Human Rights, which I mentioned earlier. I think that's a real possibility. I guess I am waiting to see, what sort of changes the mayor is indeed going to propose here. She said she wants to clarify her order on sexual harassment. I think it would not be a bad idea if the council started pushing on that and introducing their own changes. And you saw some council members in that article, particularly Ward 1 council member Brianne Nadeau, who has been pushing on this issue, making some noise like she was going to, take a lead on that. So it's not inconceivable to see lawmakers act here. I guess what I would be, curious about is, this essentially, requires some very thorny, very sensitive conversations. And the council, I am not sure, even in the wake of the Falchicchio scandal, has been handling it with the urgency that I would have expected, given the gravity of the claims made against him.
All right, it's Mike here. If you have been listening to this podcast since the beginning, you have heard me talk about Car Care to Go before. Well, they just changed their name to Roda, R-O-D-A, but it is still the same great service. It's made exactly for folks like me who forget about an oil change until the blinking light reminds them, and then forget about it again after I go to the local garage and find out that they're busy. Roda simplifies all that. You make an appointment, they pick up your ride, and they bring it back a few hours later with the oil change, the wipers replaced, or any of the other hundreds of services they offer completed. I got a freebie the first time, but the price is pretty good even without it. They're accessible all over DC, and their work is covered by a great warranty to give you peace of mind. Instead of sitting in a waiting room drinking bad coffee, why not sit at home and drink your own coffee while they do the work? Get your first oil change for just $20.23. That's 2023, get it? With the code HEYDC20. That's HEYDC20. Sign up at Roda.com, that's RODA.com, with the code HEYDC20.
So let's move on to what's happening at Metro. Alex, what can you tell us?
Well, the long and short of it is that Metro is, it's not going to be a surprise for anyone in the DC area to hear that Metro is in financial trouble. If you've lived here for any period of time, you are familiar with this cycle. We hear Metro is warning of dire service cuts coming if they can't find more money. The politicians normally end up finding some more money for them, and the cycle repeats itself a year or two later. And so I think it might be tempting for people to see this latest warnings of gloom and doom, Metro saying they would have to severely curtail service and lay off employees if they can't find $750 million as, just one in a series. And to an extent it is, but I think it is perhaps the most serious financial crisis that they have faced since the transit system's inception, really. It is one of only a few transit systems in America. It may, in fact, be the only one to not have a dedicated source of operating revenue. You may remember about 5 years ago, the whole region came together to give it dedicated funding for maintenance and capital projects for the very first time. And that was a huge deal. But the problem is that it still doesn't have money to pay for its yearly operating budget, the basics of running a train and bus system. And the issue that we're seeing now is that all of this federal aid that was keeping the transit agency afloat, thanks to the COVID relief measures, is starting to expire. And yet, even while ridership is recovering, I mean, every day Metro is saying they're posting a post-pandemic ridership record, it's still nowhere near its peak before everything shut down in 2020. And, frankly, Metro just doesn't and never really has collected enough money solely from riders to sustain itself as a transit service. It's a public good, and it has increasingly relied on public funding to operate. And so, right now, DC leaders, in addition to folks in Virginia and Maryland, are wrestling with the question of, okay, how can we create a dedicated source of funding that will prevent this cycle from occurring again? And frankly, it's an unpleasant conversation. Nobody is in the best financial place right now anywhere around the region in the wake of COVID. DC in particular, as it continues to grapple with the way that the pandemic reshaped an economy that was previously very dependent on office workers, regularly taking Metro in from the suburbs to spend money and pump up office building valuations in the district. Nobody's thrilled. Everybody knows that there need to be some very painful conversations, and as of yet, they just aren't happening.
So, you're telling me no one has just $750 million just lying around that they want to give to Metro for funsies? So I'm curious, what would a long-term funding solution actually look like? Like, who gets tasked with fixing it, and where does the money come from?
Yeah, so, there are a lot of efforts happening right now. I think at, these regional bodies, a little more behind the scenes, you're going to probably see some reports coming out from agencies that sincerely nobody who is not immersed in this stuff has heard of, like the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments. It's a mouthful, but it's a big body of all of the regions, and I'm talking all. We're getting out to Frederick and Leesburg. This is, a body that really takes in the breadth of the region's leadership, which has a lot of different interests, ranging from DC out to its farthest flung suburbs. And so, they're going to do their best to outline a plan and a way forward, as will similar bodies specifically focused in Virginia and Maryland. But, something I found the more I looked into this is that this is a question that Metro and its regional, leaders have been wrestling with for 2 decades more. I found a report from 2005 that was sponsored by that same entity, the Council of Governments, that said we need a dedicated source of funding, and the only dedicated source of funding that makes sense is a region-wide sales tax. They basically recommended you tack on an extra 0.5% to everybody's sales tax, so that way that it's equitable around the region, and that money is dedicated specifically to Metro. The feds followed up with a report in 2006 saying that that was a good idea. The COG followed up with a report in 2017 saying it was a good idea. The DC Council introduced legislation to that effect. The problem is that a region-wide sales tax is probably a non-starter. I mean, it's an extremely difficult sell to raise taxes in any political environment, but especially so when you would be trying to pass what is essentially a regressive tax. When it affects everyone equally, that means that it tends to fall on the shoulders of poorer residents more because they have less money to spend. And so that's a hard sell somewhere like DC. It's an even harder sell out in Virginia and Maryland, where they've got more people and therefore would pay more in sales tax, but they just, by virtue of being in the suburbs, receive less metro service than DC. That would sort of upset the funding allocations that have governed, how the three, states pay for metro for the last, 50, 60 years. So there's no great answer. I think you will see some people trying to come up with some other proposals, probably something more for the short term as well as for the long term. But the big problem at this moment is that talking about taxes is unpleasant, and a lot of people don't want to do it. And in my conversations with politicians, they're still very reticent to get into the details of this. But I think everyone involved with Metro's current state of affairs knows that there needs to be serious conversations happening right now.
Okay, so the first two buckets of our conversation were a little bit heavy, so I've got a little bit of comic relief for you all. As you all know, DC, we love our monuments, but people who come from other places to check out our monuments don't always love them as much as we do. So here are some of the most ridiculous, over-the-top, funny reviews of the Washington Monument that are out there online on Yelp, Google, and TripAdvisor. So Washington Monument, we love it, we know it. This person thought it was overhyped. They wrote, overhyped, all caps, 3 exclamation points. Too tall, all caps, 3 exclamation points. Needs to be modernized, all caps, 3 exclamation points. Then they go on to explain. Very disappointing. The marble was mismatched. I would think that for such a prestigious president, they could have at least gotten enough high-quality marble that actually matched. I physically hurt my neck craning to look at the monument. Could they have not made it shorter? As a 5'7" female, I felt ostracized standing next to it. It was quite intimidating. If you have kids, avoid. They will lose their self-confidence and grow up terrified of the world. I hope you all also understand the effort that I went to get a photo of the entire monument. The struggle is real. I felt victimized and scared and like I need a refund. I expected better service at such a hyped up establishment. I will never visit DC again due to this horrible, the last one is in all caps, experience, shaking my head, do better, DC, and stop allowing this to happen. This person will never be back to DC. It ruined the entire city for this person.
Oh my God. In terms of modernizing, does anybody remember when we had that earthquake and they had like that grid light up set around the Washington Monument, do we feel like that would assuage this person's fears? That way it looks more like, I don't know, like a neon like board or something. Does that modernize it enough? Does it hide the mismatched marble? Does that hide it enough for them or not really?
Then they'd leave reviews complaining about the scaffolding.
Oh my God.
It's funny that you brought this up as a topic and picked the Washington Monument in particular, because my friends and I have a habit of, you can look up some truly deranged Google reviews for all manner of both DC and international attractions. Like some of the most reviewed attractions on Google are like the Eiffel Tower, for instance, which I think has a lot in common with the DC, or the Washington Monument. It's like, what were you expecting? We promised you just a big tower, and I mean, for all its faults, it's certainly not the best DC monument, in my opinion. I think it delivers. We built a big old obelisk for you. So I'm not sure what else you want. But if there's anything I've learned perusing these Google reviews, it's that has not stopped people from sharing their thoughts.
Bridget, are there any other funny, interesting 1-star reviews?
Oh, yes.
Oh, boy.
This one is not really a review of the monument. It just says, again, all caps, kebab is not the greatest food on earth, so why so many kebab food trucks? Person doesn't like kebab. Got an opinion about kebab.
Oh my God.
This one I thought was really good. The kind of people who enjoy this probably have a protractor collection. So just to swipe at nerds, I think that's what they're trying to say.
You can't insult the city of nerds. Trivia is our hype stuff. You can't just come out here and say we all have protractors and are nerds. Come on. We are, but don't insult us.
This one I also thought was interesting. There was a lot of people who, I don't know if they're joking or not, but were confused as to why the monument did not look like Washington. This person writes, went to the Washington Monument because I heard it was actually very good. I have never been so disappointed in my life. It's just a damn obelisk. It doesn't even look like him. I can't even see a passing resemblance. Overall, I would skip this expensive and terrible monument and sightsee one that was made by a competent sculptor, like Mount Rushmore. So yeah, a lot of people who were confused as to why it didn't look like George Washington. And then my favorite one is this last one. It seems like they're alluding to something or implying something, but I don't exactly know what. Better get a good look at this monument. If you're a patriot, you know what is planned for this structure. I don't know what he means. I don't know what he's implying, but it's almost like cryptic, a very cryptic review.
Well, Bridget, if you were a patriot, you'd know. So
yeah, exactly.
I'm not a real patriot. I have no idea what he means. If I were a real patriot, I'd be like, I know what they've got planned for this monument. I guess we'll find out. TBD. Alex, Julia, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, a pleasure as always. Thanks for having me back.
Thanks much, Bridget.
And also, in 2 weeks, we're going to have our newsletter editor, Kayla, on the show to chat with me about the new book, Yellowface. It takes place in DC, and we're going to discuss how authentic it is or isn't. So if you're looking for a book to read now, check it out and then tune in. That's all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, tell someone who hates the Washington Monument, and let us know what other local spots you want to hear 1-star reviews of. You can leave us a voicemail at 202-642-2654. We'll be back tomorrow morning with even more news from around the city. Talk to you then.